Sarah, since you sat down first, tell me about your project. And we talked about that you actually knew Maureen and just finally met in real life after working on a VR project together before. Talk about that.
So, hi, I'm Sarah Stifler. I am Chief Communications Officer at the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Los Angeles. And, you know, I think what Gretchen and I can bring to this conversation is two concrete projects, but also real institutional projects without the benefit of a major media organization and celebrities.
More everybody else.
Exactly. But Maureen and I actually worked about a year ago. I was working with the New York Times on a feature about a project Doug Aiken, the artist Doug Aiken, was doing out off of Catalina, and it was these 3 submerged underwater pavilions that you had to dive through. And the pavilions were only going to be there for a short period of time, and obviously not everyone was going to be able to scuba dive through the pavilions. And so we were the first arts organization to do a 360 video with you, and it was pretty magical. I mean, the footage you all got was extraordinary. And it is a way of really making an experience, and certainly an experience, a cultural experience, an art experience like that come to life. So it was fantastic. But most recently, I worked with Jacob Koo, who is here, and some of you may have experienced his VR. Am I clicking, or are you guys?
I think click on next. There it is.
We were approached by Jacob Koo, who did a demo earlier, and actually the Kerry James Marshall VR experience was released today. It's on Oculus. It's available through a variety of different platforms. And Jacob came to me about 9 months ago, and was really, and he's a friend of the museum's and is really interested in VR, and wanted to actually initially go through our permanent collection, and wanted to do it relatively quickly because we were trying to get some projects going. And as those of you who work in art museums know, rights and reproduction for some of these major works by people like Rothko, it's a nightmare. We happened to have the Kerry James Marshall exhibition up at the time, and which was, you know, by many accounts, one of the most powerful exhibitions of last year. And we approached Kerry, and he was totally open to us going through the exhibition. So Jacob and his team came in, they scanned, and what we did is ultimately overlay didactic information from the exhibition, and then a voiceover by the chief curator and the curator of the exhibition, Helen Molesworth. I think on the next one it shows a little. No, that was to the... So basically, you can do a walkthrough of the exhibition, and there are certain points where more information is apparent, and you can click on it. There's a desktop version, which I think they were really smart to create, in addition to the goggle version, because not everybody has the goggles, and sort of as a stepping stone. To me, what has been super important about being part of this project is to begin, as you say, think about how we're all going to use this, because this is coming. And how can we use it? How can we use it smartly? How can we use it effectively and meaningfully? And to me, one of the ways that seems most apparent is education. We actually are getting together a focus group of teachers from the LAUSD next week or the week after, and meeting with them and sharing the experience with them and asking them, how could you use this in the classroom? Either before a trip to the museum, after a trip to the museum, if you can't get to the museum, how can this actually be used to get out into communities that can't necessarily make it? And along the same lines, this is incredible for archiving. I mean, for those of us that put together museum exhibitions, you know, the static installation shot, like, come on, this is a totally different experience. And so in terms of being able to really preserve an exhibition, I think it's a game changer. So those are two things that for me really stand out. I think it's a way to distribute exhibitions broader, but these are conversations that we as museum professionals are going to have together. And I think it works across the lines to science museums in really beautiful and wonderful ways. And one thing I will just say too about our two projects, or the difference between our two projects, which are kind of great case studies for this, is that MOCA's project is specifically designed to be used outside of the museum. It's not, I mean, you know, we're going to have goggles in our reading room, but it's not necessarily meant to be used in the museum. And with that, I'm going to...
Well, actually, before you go there, let me ask the standard questions of budget, project support, for those who are trying to figure out, like, yes, did you also have a pile of money that Charlize laid on?
So we volunteered to be a guinea pig for this, in a way. So to be honest, budget was not something that we had to worry about. But given the success that we feel like it has had internally, it's something that we are now very actively figuring out. How can we incorporate this into our working method moving forward? It's going to get cheaper, you know? I mean, there was a moment that, like, DVD players were $3,000, and now you can get one for $50. And there are a lot of different ways to do it, certainly as well. So, you know, as a contemporary art museum, our board, our people expect us to always be out there experimenting. And as you say, I think experimenting is going to be a really important part of this, for sure.
Gretchen, talk about your project.
Yeah, so when Sarah and I were talking last week about our projects, and we had that moment where we realized hers is like a digital record of an exhibition that no longer exists anywhere. The tour is done, the objects have been dispersed, it doesn't exist, and this is kind of the only record of it, so I think it's kind of an interesting example of a companion to an exhibition. And what was different about the VR experience that we had here at NHMLA last year is that we actually took this digital experience and sort of anchored it into a very traditional sort of exhibition experience. So that's kind of our sort of different take on it. So this exhibition, well, it's an exhibition with a VR sort of backbone to it, was conceived out of a visit that a number of colleagues took to Sundance Film Festival last year and were turned on to this beautiful film produced by Weaver, based here in Los Angeles, called The Blue. And it's an 18-minute film, and it basically is taking you through a series of kind of undersea segments. So you're looking in a reef, you're doing a shipwreck dive, and then you're also going down to the bottom of the ocean to see a whale fall and to see kind of the life that's happening around the whale fall. And so what we were, do you mind just showing that quick TV spot? Yeah, so people can get kind of a sense of what the scope is.
Discover the Blue, an underwater VR experience, only at the Natural History Museum. Tickets available at nhm.org.
So when they saw this film at Sundance, what was exciting is that it's you know, great scientifically accurate content, which for those of you who are looking for VR content, especially for natural history museums, science museums, it's really hard to find good content. So, and also we have a tremendous amount of marine research going on here at the museum and collections, so it fit really nicely with our mission. So it seemed like a good fit. What we had to do then over the next several months with Weaver is try to figure out how to take an 18-minute film from a festival stall and bring it into a museum setting. And so in March of this year, we had our first dance with VR downstairs. And basically what we did is we took it and we put it across a sprawling 3,000 square foot gallery. What you're looking at in this image is the sort of intro lounge. So we decided we needed a way to help visitors acclimatize after the shock of LA traffic and parking and buying a ticket, give them a few minutes to kind of put on their goggles and start their dive. So they would come into this intro lounge, our guest relations staff would orient them to what they were going to be doing, and then they would be ushered to one of 5 pods where they would have a tethered VR experience in a small area about 8 by 10 feet. you could watch your friend or your parent or your sister go through the VR experience by watching a monitor in that same pod so you could see what they were seeing. And the whole video experience in VR was about 7 minutes long, so it was a very brief segment. So some interesting things that we had about 10,000 visitors over the course of 3 months. We did upcharge for this, so we charged $10 for regular public and $8 for members. This is the first time we've ever charged our members for something.
How was that received?
I have not heard a single negative comment about that. My colleagues in membership and marketing tell us. So that was a great test. We actually had about 30% of the visitors who saw the exhibition were members, so that gave us kind of a good indication that members are interested in sort of paying for some of these extra kinds of experiences. Of course, there's also the goals for this were not to make, this was not to be money making. This was really a test for us to see what it meant to have this kind of experience in a natural history museum setting. What does this mean for engaging our visitors in a different kind of content? We were also trying to do it with very little risk, so we worked with existing content, so we were not investing in a brand new customized experience, so our costs were really very low. We did an all in-house build. The lounge that you saw, that was stock footage that was projected on the wall, some IKEA furniture. I think our total build budget was like $23,000, so we kept it all really low, and then we just had staffing, the GR expense of providing that sort of experience for the visitors. So I think, it was really about, can we drive some new audiences to the museum? In some of the surveys that we did, 40% of the visitors who saw the VR experience had never been to the museum before and had come specifically to do that.
Oh, wow.
So that was great. Kids under 10, this is not for them. So we also were getting a larger number of adult audiences to come to the Natural History Museum, which was a goal. And the other thing we found is that 65% of our visitors who did this experience had never done VR before. So a lot of them responded that they appreciated so much that personal escort through the experience. We did have iPads that kind of gave them the same introduction to what they were going to be doing. People felt a little mixed on that. They really, at the end of the day, wanted someone to help them adjust the headset, make sure they didn't get tangled up in their tether and not walk into the wall and those kind of things. Some other things that we learned, not a highly didactic experience. So for those of us in natural history museums or museums where we want to have our long list of cognitive goals for what people are going to learn when they walk out of the exhibition, that was less of a concern for us, but we did bring out about 15 jars of wet specimens from our collections, so everything from tentacles of an octopus to the lice that live on a whale's hair, all kinds of things were in the jars. And so we provided some content about the animals that people were seeing in the VR, but we didn't spend a lot of energy really unpacking that for them. But one of the things that we did find is that visitors were so curious. They had all these questions. They walked out of there, I want to know how long that whale is going to be down there before it's completely decomposed. Do those things really bioluminesce that way? They had all these questions. And so it's certainly, for us, it's like we need to take advantage of that kind of heightened emotional state that they're in, where they're so excited they want to know more. And so then I want to take them kind of into the mouth of the whale after they've had their VR experience and then give them that deeper content. So I think for us, that's kind of the next step, is we know this technology has great power in getting people really emotionally connected to a subject. So then how do we follow that up with something that's about our research, about our collections, stories of climate change, ocean conservation, some of the things that are really important to us. So we're going to come back with something else again. It was a great experience for us to see the new audiences, to see people really enjoying themselves of all ages, and then thinking about how we can kind of take that a step further.
Let's open up the questions. We've got about 15 minutes. There's a hand in the back over there. Raise your hand again if you don't mind. So it sounds like it was all wonderful and it was a success. I call BS on that. So what was the bad part? Give me some darkness. What was the Oprah moment where you're like, is this not working? Was it all just wonderfully easy?
I guess, I don't know if this is darkness, but it's the question of throughput. We had 7 staff in the gallery one taking a ticket, one sort of signing you up in the list for the pod, and then one staff member for each pod. So you have 7 staff in a gallery that has a maximum throughput of each day of 160 people. So,
The scale's not.
It's, people love being able to walk around the gallery. They want to walk around more, but the trade-off is that it's a lot of staffing to support a very special experience. So I think sort of long-term, we're trying to explore some other, whether it's theater seating, which then you don't get to be walking around freely, but you get more people through it, operationally more simple. So I think just for museums, it's kind of
That's that balance, the
Yeah.
scale and the intimacy
Yeah.
and the power. Any lessons from your guys's?
Our experience was really good. The only thing that I would say is that because we were allowed to have the fortune of being a guinea pig, I mean, I have a million ideas of other ways I could use this technology and things I could do with it. And it's like you get a taste, and now
You're addicted.
the real money is involved and
First one's free.
How we would move through that is going to be the big challenge for sure. But
And if I could add, I think, with the way museums are partnering around traveling exhibitions and pooling resources, whether it's collections or intellectual power or the cost, I think there's promise in museums collaborating on creating original content. Because I really don't care what content, like if they're doing it in Chicago and New York, that's fine. I'll still do it in LA. So I think for museums to kind of pool resources on creating films for VR that we can tour around in that way, I think there's a lot of promise there, and just kind of sharing knowledge about what we're learning and what our failures are.
Great. The question?
Yeah, I'm Johan from Beaux-Arts Brussels. Can this technology also be a threat for existing museums? Like we are here in the Natural History Museum, and when you look around 360 degree, you see all 3D settings. Do they have to change now? Like you said, it's all coming, or is this kind of experience like walking to seeing that set up animals still gonna work in the future?
What do you guys think? The question, if I'm understanding it correctly, are these types of exhibitions, these setups, these experiences, going to be replaced? Why? I'm going to be even more pessimistic. Why go to the museum if you can go to a museum virtually? Or what are the benefits to these installations?
Someone pointed out a really interesting analogy. In the 1960s, when sports was first introduced to television, the owners of sports teams were against it because they thought it meant no one would go to games anymore. I think we all know that that's not true, and that this technology is about something different, because people go to museums, and I think this is whether it's a natural history museum or an art museum, for a social experience. And when you're doing this VR experience, it's isolating. Right? I can't, you're not turning to your friend and saying, oh my God, what is that? Or like, check that out. So I think that element of human connection and sociability that happens in cultural spaces is lost. It doesn't mean that there isn't additional things to explore in it.
I think there's also, the reason that we built it out the way we did in a gallery was to make it different as a destination than what you would just get if you did it at the mall, that there was a whole museum-like experience connected to it, and then rooting it back on the real specimens and the real art, I think is always, and the VR experience here ended up actually being quite social, because you were watching your friend do it, and you would see someone like shout out to their friend, like, the whale is coming up behind you, get out of the way. And there was some of that was already happening, or they were laughing at each other, and they were like all kind of talking about it afterwards. So it became a social shared experience, even if you were still alone with your headset. The other thing I would say is that I think the museums were always trying to find some technology to help visitors see what you can't see just by looking at that guy in the diorama, whether it's like an old scientific illustration or a photograph or a video. I think that VR or AR or MR are just the next ways to help visitors see what our scientists know, but it's hard to see whether it's because of time or scale or we just don't understand. So I think it's always going to be a role for that in museums.
Yeah, can I just add on to that? Because since we worked on that first Doug Aiken piece, we've done about like a dozen or 15 pieces with museums around the world. And one of the funnest things about VR is how good it is at scale. So like we worked on an exhibit about very tiny wooden beads with like very intricate sculptures in it. And we were able to like just put the whole, so if you put it in, you were in the bead in headset. So we just
You were
like
shrunk down.
You were, so we just like wrapped that around. So it was like it just gave you a different way in. And because museums are so great at scale, you know, that always works really well. And we've also found that interiors and architecture is like, people like to be inside rooms, you know, and that's what we've seen. People respond to that the best by far. We just published a piece yesterday about the Abu Dhabi Louvre, and people just getting to look at like the ceiling was like the whole reason for that. So yeah, I think in terms of giving people a new way to see it, it's a valuable addition to coming to the place.
Have you guys explored AR? So VR, the way that I describe it is I leave this reality and I immerse myself in another. I shut off this reality and immerse myself in another. Augmented reality is I stay in this reality and it is enhanced by digital overlays, digital assets. So that to me is in a world where we are mobile first, right? We're always, for better or for worse, attached to our phones attached to us. We're walking around in this world. I'm not going to be walking around and shutting out the world, but I'm going to probably want to enhance that world. So these experiences could be augmented. Have you looked at augmented reality? Have you heard of examples of people experimenting at museums with AR?
Yeah, so I was at the Field Museum before I came here, and so we were doing some AR with some exhibits, just very simple displays. But one of the things that we just did here at NHMLA is we're partnering with USC Institute for Creative Technologies and the School of Education there to do an AR project over the La Brea tar pits, which is kind of if you go to the tar pits, like, that museum can only be there. It can't be anywhere else in the world, because that's where the 5 million plus fossils are coming out of the asphalt, right? But most visitors, you walk up and you're just looking at this kind of, it's like a public park, and then it looks like there's something kind of sticky on the ground, and you don't. So the AR would be perfect there, right, to help you really interpret this site and what's happened there over time. So we're going to be hoping that NSF will give us some money for that, and we can start working that out, but I think it's a perfect place to try that out. Yeah.
I think also AR, and it was actually a conversation we've had with a couple of artists, is putting the technology and helping, as an institution, helping artists use the technology to create different experiences as well. It was something, we've had a number of conversations with different artists about, like, having the museum fall apart all around you, and you know all sorts of crazy
Maybe the
stuff.
artists should come here and play with these dioramas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to play with these dioramas?
I'd love to, like, levitate over the dioramas. I mean, I'm actually in the early stages of a project with Frank Kerry that he's building a new space in Arles, in the south of France, and so it's going to be an AR project that will exist inside that museum. And so we've filmed him as a hologram, basically. And I guess
Videogrammetry?
we've done a capture of him having a conversation with Hans Ulrich Obrist, and the idea is that, you know, he will be able to exist eternally, basically, in this museum, and you'll be able to go and have an experience with him that's quite intimate and educational. So I think all these things remain relevant. The physical object and the VR experience and the thing that's a crossover of the two, it all just creates a more expanded experience of whatever it is you're trying to express.
And the thing in between that and the VR is us sitting here in our chairs. The real life.
Are there other questions? I don't see any hands, so there's one up here. When I started working in online journalism in the 90s, my boss pulled me aside and said, you know, there's a difference between online journalism and journalism online. And I looked at him like, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, think about it this way. There's online art and art online. art online is incredibly powerful and useful for those who can't make it to the museum to see the Mona Lisa. That's art online, but online art is art made of the medium, only made possible by that medium. What's interesting about this one is the merger of both, the specialty of one, the importance of the other, and they're all in play. One doesn't replace the other, which is really exciting, and I feel like more and more people are embracing this disruption or this new emerging technology opposed to rejecting it like past technologies. Do you find that at your place? Are more people open to experimenting, and why are they open to it now than in the past? I remember when I used to work in the Bay Area, talking to someone from the museum, trying to get them to think about multimedia storytelling for the museums. I'm like, that's amazing what you can do. And they're like, we're only in charge of the website to sell at the gift shop, the virtual gift shop. It changed pretty dramatically over the 15 years. What do you think?
Question more about like internal culture.
Culture.
Being open to that sort
Correct.
of change.
Yeah, I mean, our museum is totally embedded in being part of that change. And I think that, even the specificity of everything being platform specific, right? That each of our social media channels are platform specific. And they are about creating content. They are not promotional places. And we all know now that anytime you try to promote something on social media, it doesn't do well. So you have to be storytellers, and that's obviously what we all do. But it's really interesting how communications departments, I am working ever closely with the curatorial department because we are a storyteller in an increasing kind of way. And I think that's exciting. I mean, I think that's made my job a lot more interesting than it was 15 years ago. And that's just because the field has changed. But I think we have to be that way. I mean, that's where we're all going. And,
If you want to survive, yeah, lean into it.
And so that's interesting.
Yeah, I think having examples of where technology combined with the real is actually the most powerful for visitors, and being able to share that with the scientific staff is really important, so that this is the basis for all of that. Like without this.
Correct.
So I think that as long as it's clear that these are not going to all become screens, I might layer some screens in here to liven it a little bit or help interpret it, but it wouldn't be replacing it. So I think just having some good examples. I think that the scientific staff here was very proud of the blue because we found a way to incorporate some specimens into it, and we know that was kind of just a first step, and so it's always trying to find that balance. And for the scientists, a lot of them are really powerful storytellers in their own right, and so they're realizing the value of this technology and helping to talk about their science, and especially around the critical issues.
Great. Question?
So, I'm Merritt Price, head of design at the Getty. So I was interested in, Sarah, your project with Kerry James Marshall and documenting that exhibition. And you mentioned it was easy because it's a living artist and he cleared the rights, and touched on the fact that for other exhibitions where you've got things from all over the world and there are copyright issues, if you had any thoughts on how that might resolve in future. Because at the Getty, we're dealing with lots of objects, this dead people,
Right.
the rights and estates and things are problematic.
Again, this is all very preliminary because we're in the beginning stages of all of these changes. But it reminded me about 10 years ago when we all started making videos and having to change lender agreements to incorporate, that it wasn't just photography, that each organization could take video. And so, we're going to have to, thinking about, the loan agreements are going to have to change to include VR stuff moving forward. But we internally started talking about how we want to think about these as digital publications. That the VR experiences that we create are more publications than they are promotional, and that we would think about them in a legal kind of way, more like a catalog, and that it would be ancillary in that way, but that would be a way for us to begin to structure some of the intellectual property issues and all of those other things that we all have to contend with.
I think we are out of time. Please, a round of applause for the panel and for Legend.